Hi everyone! So once again, happy June. It's LGBTQ Pride Month, and to celebrate here at Literary Gladiators, we're doing a bunch of videos this month to talk about LGBTQ people in literature and LGBTQ themes in literature as well. So hopefully you saw my first video earlier this month where I talked about growing up and being a teenager, finding out my own sexual orientation and coming into my gayness. And I was talking a lot about gay young adult books that I read that had an impact on me. One of the books that I talked about in my last video was called The Realm of Possibility, and I know one of the things I mentioned in it that I liked about it was that not only was the book about LGBTQ topics and queer topics, but it was also a book that kind of queered what it meant to be your standard book of poetry. It's a book of poetry. And so to talk more about the idea of like queering the structure of books, today I wanted to talk about some books that I've read that do just that. So in my junior year of college, I took a course called Queer Fiction, and we talked a lot about books that not only have queer topics, but also have queered the form of literature itself. And so I wanted to talk about that today and talk about some of those books. Yeah, so let's go ahead. The first book that we had read in the course was by James Baldwin, who's one of my favorite, not just authors, but just icons in general. I love reading his work. I love watching interviews with him and documentaries about him. A film about James Baldwin's life and work, I Am Not Your Negro, just came out earlier this year, and I haven't seen it yet, but I really would like to. But the first book we read was by James Baldwin. It's called Giovannis Room, and it's one of his more well-known books, I would say. So we started off with this book because it talks about queer topics and themes. It's about a queer man. I don't want to necessarily call him a gay man because he has dated women and whatnot, and I don't want to put a label on him. I don't believe he self-identifies in the book. If he does, forgive me. I haven't read it since my junior year, which was only a year ago, but still. But it takes place in 1950s Paris, and it's about this queer man and his relationship with another man, and kind of finding himself and the struggles that he's dealt with. It's really interesting. This was, I think, the first book we read in a lot of ways because it doesn't have it doesn't queer the structure of fiction as much as some of the other books we read, but it still does in certain ways. So, for example, the book plays a lot with time, and there's a lot of things told in flashback and things where you're not exactly sure the time where what's happening kind of fits into the plot, and I think that's really interesting. So that's one way that the structure of this book was kind of queered. I also think another thing that Baldwin did was a lot of his books are about topics of race relations, specifically in the United States, but also abroad. And as a black man, he made a conscious decision to make the main character of this book a white queer man. I think that's interesting when you compare it to what he writes about in his other novels. So that's another thing I think that he did to kind of queer this book. So it's very interesting. Definitely read it. It's kind of sad, but it's a great book. The next book that we read in the course, which is a book that I really thoroughly enjoyed, is by one of my another favorite people for me, another favorite person for me, Audre Lorde. So the book that we read here is called Sammy, A New Spelling of My Name, and it's a biomythography. So as you can tell by calling it a biomythography, that's the structure that this book is written in, and that is a structure that exists really to queer what fiction means. So in some ways, it's a blurring between nonfiction and fiction, because in the title or in the name of the structure of biomythography, you can kind of get biography out of it, and that is one part of the book, but you also get the myth. So you hear mythography and you think of like mythology and things like that, and it's kind of those two things combining in some ways. So the things that happen in this book, most of them did actually happen. They're not told as they factually happened, to a T, and they're rewritten in a way that Lorde wanted to kind of find the meaning in these experiences in her own life. So she kind of writes about her own life almost as if it is a mythology, which is really cool. So there's a lot of really cool stuff happening in here, and there's a lot of meaning making that goes on in this book that Lorde has done for the experiences she had in her life. So it's really, really cool. And now biomythography is a subset kind of literature that if you're interested in checking out more, definitely look it up, and you can read other biomythographies. In the class, we talked about how this book and what it kind of tries to do is biographies talk about truth with like a little t, in that it's factual, that kind of truth. Biomythography, and what Lord's done here, is try to reach truth with a capital T, and the idea there is that no, it's not factual truth, but this is the truth in the meaning and the way that she's looked at her life and what she's gotten out of it. It's kind of like how we look back at our lives and we think of things differently than how they exactly happened because of the greater meaning that we've gotten out of them. So it's a really great book. Definitely suggest you read it. And not only is it queer in the structure by making biomythography, but it's also a queer theme because it's about Lord being a black lesbian and kind of coming into her own identity, and it's really great. So definitely check it out. The next book that we have read was another book I really enjoyed. It's called Funny Boy by Shyam Salvadori. It's a really great book. So it's about, it's kind of similar to Sammy in that it's based off of Salvadori's life, but it's not really his actual story. It's not really a biography. It's kind of a fictionalized telling. What's different, though, is that in this, Salvadori creates a new character that is not him. Whereas in Sammy, it's Lord, talking about Lord. So this book's really great. The way that this really kind of queers the structure is that it's made up of several different stories that were put together to create one novel. So it's the same character, different times in the character's life, and then it kind of was put together to create one cohesive novel. It's also really cool because it queers it in a lot of ways by making the main character's queerness. It's about a young Sri Lankan boy who is Tamil during the Tamil-Sinhalese conflicts. And queerness growing up for Salvadori was not necessarily something that was kind of smiled upon. It was looked down upon. But Salvadori frames this book in a way that says, hey, this is powerful. Being a queer person is powerful. And by making Salvadori saying that he's the funny boy, which is how people would talk about him, saying, oh, he's funny. Kind of talking about his queerness and his gender expression in that way, but he makes it the center of the book, and he makes himself the character who has the most power, so it's really cool. Not only does it talk about queer topics and what it means to be growing up as a queer and femme person in Sri Lanka, but it talks about political conflict and race conflicts, and it's really, really awesome. I definitely suggest that you check it out. It's a great book. So I really enjoyed this book. The next book that we read, that I actually can't show you because I don't physically own it, was by Leslie Feinberg, and it's called Stone Butch Blues. This book is really great, and it kind of follows in the realm of both Sammy and Funny Boy, in that it is in many ways the story of Feinberg's life, but Z creates her own character that is not here. Leslie Feinberg uses the pronouns Z, here, here's, by the way. So there are a non-binary person who doesn't use the pronouns he or she because Z felt that neither of those pronouns fit. And Feinberg has also passed away since writing this book and whatnot. But the book's really awesome. It tells the story of this person, Jess, or Jessie, who changes their name a little bit in the book as their gender identity kind of grows and expands. But it's a really great book. It tells in many ways the story of Feinberg's life, but through a fictionalized character, kind of like Salvadori did in his book. It's not really about him, but it is about him. And Feinberg does the same thing here. It's not really about here, but it is about here through this other character. It's a super awesome book. It queers fiction in a lot of ways. One of the ways I think is really cool and how it sits in the world of queer fiction right now is that it's actually available for free online. If you go to lesliefeinberg.net, you can download the book entirely for free. And that was one of Feinberg's parting wishes before Z passed away, to say, hey, I want this book, which is a book about liberation in many ways, to be available for free for anybody to read online. And it's been translated into, I don't know how many languages, but a whole lot. It talks about queer struggle, both in terms of sexual orientation and gender identity. It also talks about class struggle, class liberation. It talks about race issues, race struggle, race liberation, racial justice. it's really interesting. Talks about these things in a lot of interesting ways. I definitely recommend folks go check it out. It's a really amazing book and a seminal book in different kind of politics and different liberation movements and whatnot. So definitely check it out. And it's available for free online, so you have no excuse. The last book we read that was a book that I think perhaps queers the world of fiction the most. It's actually part of a series, a project of sorts, called the Encyclopedia Project. So I have here actually volume 2, which is F through K, which I think is, they picked those letters on purpose. But it's really cool. So it's like a regular encyclopedia, and that you can flip in. And so, for example, here is the page for hell. But what happens is, instead of it being an encyclopedic entry about these words, it's actually either an illustration or a short story or a poem or just a piece of art, literature, art, visual art, whatever, relating to that word somehow that one of these authors has picked. A lot of the authors are queer or are have other marginalized identities, which is really cool. But also, it queers the form of fiction by saying this is literally, you know, in many ways fiction, because there's a lot of short stories and whatnot, but it's written in the form of an encyclopedia. And what's really cool too is, so at the end here, right? So at the end of the section for hell, just like another encyclopedia, it will tell you other things you can see, so you can kind of continue the story along. Not that these other entries are containing that same story, but they somehow relate to this entry here. So for example, for hell, it says see Barbary Coast or denouement. And then if you go, they're both in the first volume of the Encyclopedia Project, which I actually don't have. But if I had that volume, I could go open that volume and flip to Barbary Coast and read that and kind of, you know, see how they're related. So that's really cool. I think this is a brilliant project and an amazing thing. If you go on Amazon also, this book, which is pretty big, because it's like a, you know, real encyclopedia volume, I think I paid $25 for this, which is not a lot of money, and this is a really great project. So I definitely suggest that you go in and you check this out online and perhaps think about getting it for yourself. To my knowledge, only the first 2 volumes were published, and the project has kind of died off since then, unfortunately, because it's a lot of work to get that many authors to be able to write these different entries and stuff, and for someone to curate that and edit it. But I definitely recommend you folks check this out. This is a really awesome, the writing here is really cool, the artwork that's in here is really cool, and it's just so cool to like see this and read it and kind of think of how there are queer artists today who are really queering what it means to be a writer, and who are changing what it means to you know, exist in literary spaces, and just changing the game in general. That's so cool to me, and this book is really an encapsulation of the whole class that I took, and the things we talked about in it. I loved it so much, so definitely check it out. So those are the books that I want to talk about today. I hope that you enjoyed learning about some queer themes and books that are also kind of queering the structure of things in literature. Definitely check out some of these books. They're really great. I'm sure that you'll enjoy them. And I hope that you are having a wonderful June, and that you're having a happy Pride. And definitely check out, about a week from now, I should be having my next video for a Pride Month up. So definitely come back and check that out. Thanks so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.